Thank you, Sue, so much for the invitation, and so many of you here who I've met before. It feels like I'm coming home to a degree. You've heard that I attend Open Table not every first Monday of the month, but I try to get here. Unfortunately, Bridgenorth Food Bank happens every Monday on Monday morning, including New Year's Day. I was working, not Christmas Day, but we had a lot of bank holidays last year, and so I'm invariably a little bit late. I'm charging down here. So I know people like Trevor, Richard, Sue, Ruth, and so on. But I actually lived in Ludlow briefly back in 91, 92, and I knew Callie and I knew Carl then, and it was when Paul Meiklejohn was the minister at Ludlow Elim, and in fact, around about this time last year I was speaking at Ludlow Elim, and sure enough picked up a client there as well. So it's lovely to come back. It's really nice. One of the lovely things about this role is that I get to see other people in their environment and how they worship, whether it's a different song playlist and so on, or different ways of doing communion and so on. And it's a real blessing to actually visit all over the place. And I'm speaking in Woollisgate and Stourbridge next weekend. I was spoken up in Stafford in the last couple of months. I'm speaking in a place I didn't even know, just Western Lullingfield, a little bit north of here, about 20 miles north of here, in June and so on. Thank you very much to everyone who's been involved so far, and it's been really powerful, in particular, really powerful psalm, and thank you for that, Trevor. The reading that we heard is very familiar to us, and I've entitled this talk Compassion in Action. It really is the sort of watchword of the way that CAP operates. But I'm going to start off just by asking a bit of audience participation. We've had some already today. What's the biggest crowd of people that you've ever been a part of? Maybe it was a sporting event, or a musical festival, or perhaps a rally. I've had people tell me about being part of the Billy Graham rallies, back in the 80s or 70s, 80s, 70s, 80s. Let me start you off, and for my sins, I'm a Chelsea fan. And there may even be a rerun of this, I hope not, but I was at the 2022 Carabao Cup final at Wembley, and Chelsea lost on penalties to Liverpool. There were 11 perfect penalties by Liverpool and 10 perfect penalties by Chelsea, and then one got boomed over the bar. 3 years earlier, I was at Wembley when Chelsea lost to Man City on penalties as well in the 2019 Carabao Cup final. There's a theme. Both were crowds of about 80 to 90,000. Has anyone else, you said, were you part of the Billy Graham rallies? And
60, whatever.
Okay, and 300,000 or something like that at that?
Well, it was, I think we were at the West Brom.
Well, okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I was at Wembley when Billy Graham spoke there for the last time.
Okay.
And he held out his Bible and said, "This is the word of God," and there was this most enormous clap of thunder.
Brilliant. A huge crowd of people can be quite an incredible sight. Just a vast sea of faces. I've talked about, my experiences, and we've heard from some other people, but the packed London Olympic Stadium for Super Saturday in 2012, I was actually a volunteer at the Games, or a sellout Wembley Stadium, as I say. It's hard to grasp the numbers involved in these enormous gatherings, but these crowds represent only a fraction of the millions of people in the UK who are currently trapped in poverty. With the cost of living at eye-watering levels, incomes not matching, poverty is creeping into more and more households. In fact, 13.4 million people are living in poverty in the UK today, according to research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. That's enough to fill over 150 Wembley stadiums. Just imagine such a vast crowd. For anyone who's never experienced it, it's easy to hear the word poverty and wonder what it actually means. Now, our own Director of External Affairs, a chap called Gareth McNabb, explains poverty very simply and equally starkly. He says poverty is when you haven't got enough income to be able to afford what you need for life. Just listen to the news and you quickly become aware of the brutal impact of poverty. It's no secret that people are having to routinely choose between a meal or heating the water to have a wash. They simply can't afford both. Now, CAP recently commissioned a YouGov poll to find out more about the reality of living in poverty in the UK today. According to the poll, 16 million people have been forced to skip meals recently due to cost. That's 1/4 of the population. It also found that half of all adults, or 25 million people, went without heating at some point last winter as they couldn't afford the energy costs. And we know how cold it has turned just in the last few days. You may well be able to relate. We're all trying to save money where we can at the moment, but many are finding themselves in these impossible situations every day. The YouGov poll found that 6 million people, that's 1 in every 11, have gone without heat on a daily basis as a result of poverty. Now here in Ludlow, in the town alone, that's 1,000 people, or more than 6,000 across the patch that the debt centre that I run covers. The never-ending pressure of financial insecurity has a detrimental impact on people's mental health and well-being. And it means that even a small, unexpected cost can push them over the edge into problem debt. They are literally living life on a knife edge. The numbers are huge, so huge that it can be hard to put them into perspective. But Jesus deals in the individual, however big the crowd. We reflect that at CAP, and for all of the statistics, I could tell you, and I will share a little bit of some individual stories of individual lives, literally not 200 yards from here, ravaged by the effects of poverty, debt, stigma, judgment, domestic violence and abuse, addiction, attempted suicide, child abuse, debilitating illness, storm and misery. We know that God calls us, the church, to serve those in need. But with such a vast crowd before us, it can be hard to know how to respond constructively. So to help us consider this, I'd like to take you back a couple of thousand years to a small rural location by the Sea of Galilee, the site of a well-known miracle of Jesus, the feeding of the 5,000. It was a good job just as I went out to pray. Is it Carol? Yeah, Carol, who was reading, said, can I just check the reading with you? And she was 10 chapters later with the destruction of the temple, so fortunately we found ourselves back with the feeding of the 5,000, and thank you for the reading. So in this story, Jesus too is confronted by a vast crowd of people. The passage tells us there were 5,000 men, besides women and children, and most scholars agree the size of the crowd could well have been in excess of 20,000. As we read through the Gospels, we discover that this crowd was full of people who were broken, hurting, and outcast. People searching for healing, hope, and meaning. Maybe not too dissimilar to a large part of the UK population today, and indeed your own community here in Ludlow. At this point, as Carol reminded us, it's also worth noting that Jesus, in the middle of his earthly ministry, had just learned about the death of his relative, John the Baptist, and so he's taking some time out by himself to grieve. As it said in Matthew 13:14, when Jesus heard what had happened about the death of John the Baptist, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. But hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. So recognise first how Jesus notices the crowd. People were desperate to encounter him, to receive his healing, to hear his teaching, and to experience the hope that he brought. And they travelled in their masses to meet him. Jesus' response to the arrival of the vast multitude was pretty remarkable. He didn't sense the coming crowd and then turn a blind eye or sneak over the top of the hill for some me time. He could have been forgiven for this. After all, he was grieving the loss of a family member. I don't know about you, but when confronted with the crowd of people experiencing death and poverty today, it can be tempting to turn a blind eye or pass it off as somebody else's problem. Jesus does neither of these things. He faces the crowd, he takes note of them, and he allows the interruption into his life. Jesus did more than just notice the crowd. He could have acknowledged their struggle and sympathised while continuing on his way. But the Bible says that he had compassion upon them. Now, this word compassion is used multiple times throughout the Gospels to describe Jesus' actions towards those who were marginalised and suffering. In Luke 7, for example, Jesus sees a widow mourning the loss of her son and is moved with compassion. He acts by raising the woman's son back to life. One way to interpret the word compassion is to say that Jesus' heart went out to them. However, the more accurate translation is far more raw than this, and it means to be moved in the inward parts. Now, in the society of Jesus' time on earth, compassion was said to be felt deep in a person's internal organs, literally in their intestines. So when Jesus saw that crowd of desperately suffering people, he was moved not with some pink and soft and fluffy feeling of sadness, but with deep, gut-wrenching compassion. Now, in the ancient world, this attitude of deep and raw compassion was rare, and it wasn't seen as an admirable virtue at all. St. Augustine quoted the ancient Stoic philosopher Seneca in saying that compassion is the vice of a feeble soul. In this way, as in so many others, Jesus takes the conventional beliefs of the day and turns them upside down. When God came to live in the world through the person of his beloved only Son Jesus, as fully man, he came to enter without measure into the pain and suffering of those who needed him the most. Now, Jesus' example here is so important. As followers, we can allow his example and love to transform us. We must become those who not only notice people's pain and suffering, but who have deep, stirring compassion on them. Like Jesus, we must see the crowd, the millions across the UK who are struggling in poverty, as a group of precious and loved individuals, each created in God's image with their own unique story to tell. And that is my experience daily across South Shropshire with this work that I do, which I so love, and which brings me so much joy to see lives transformed. Today, I'd like to introduce you to one of those precious individuals, Melinda. Now, she lives down in South London, Croydon area, and she has shared her experiences of living under the cruel weight of debt and poverty.
The cost of living in the UK is rising, and it's changing people's lives.
So many people skipping meals is a sobering thing that a third of employees.
Get that up there, Kieran. Sorry. Just got it there. Sorry.
The cost of living in the UK is rising, and it's changing people's lives.
So many people skipping meals is a sobering thing that a third of employers
are likely to make redundancies over the next year.
January, the average household energy bill could surge above £4,200.
I'm 62 years young. I was born in Barbados. I have a mental health issue, and when my boys were very young, I got very ill and I was laid off work. I think if you've got a mental health label, people don't take you seriously. I was getting £64 a week to feed and clothe myself and my children. I had to choose between buying something as simple as a bra. I didn't buy because I would have to pay like the gas or the electric. The few things that I had started to break down. My fridge, my cooker, my television and my washing machine all broke down within a week. And I went against my own principle of saving up. So I ran up over £2,000. I was also borrowing money from family members, seesawing between paying my bills and not having enough to live on. Sometimes I couldn't sleep at night because I was thinking, oh, I've got this to pay, I've got that to pay, and will the debt collectors be coming round, you know. The anxiety as to how will this play out was very real. I have had suicidal tendencies in the past, and my future never seemed set. I suddenly felt, because of my bills and because of my mental health situation, I was never going to make it, that I'm no good. I was very fortunate because the doctor I was seeing suggested Wimbledon Guild, and they recommended me to CAP. And when I contacted the number that they gave me, I spoke to Peter, and Peter was very, very helpful, very kind. And we went through the process that to get me out of debt, have all my bills and everything taken care of. And then one day he invited me to the church, and I went along. I was in awe because people were coming up to you and talking to you as though you were not a stranger, as though you were part of the family. And it's so uplifting. I really feel that I've come home, and I'm very glad to say that now I'm debt-free. And at first it didn't seem real because I had been struggling with my bills for a couple of years, more than a couple of years. To know that they had sorted it out in 3 months and that I didn't have to worry, it was such a relief. Oh, I can't tell you, I was so happy. Working with CAP has given me a desire to do better. I've actually started going to college, and I'm learning maths and IT. Peter encouraged me to become a befriender.
Having you there and saying, well, actually, I've recently gone through this process myself, it's a real comfort to other people to actually hear that yes, you can get through the process and come to a place of flourishing.
Totally different point of view now. I'm looking forward to see what tomorrow will bring and what the future will hold. I'm feeling comfortable in myself and in my place with God. It has to be the work of God because there was no way out, but God has made a way.
I still can't help but cry when I see things like that. And one of the things that head office do each year for us is produce a client testimonial film like that. And they're brilliant and they're beautifully produced and shot and edited and scripted and so on. I'm lucky enough that I don't tend to be too shy in coming forward, and I've asked a lot of clients that I've worked with locally to share. And when I gave a similar talk at my home church at Bridgenorth Baptist Church back at the beginning of October, one of the clients I'd seen debt-free just earlier that year, she told her story, and so there's nothing so powerful. I could tell you a lady who lives in Clipping Mortimer, we call her Dee, she had 16 shots of electroconvulsive therapy. It was something that I thought had gone out in the Victorian era. They strap you and make sure you're not going to bite your tongue and zap your brain. She had 16 shots in a year. She spent months in Redwoods up in Shrewsbury, lost her job, her car, her home, her partner, her daughter, her dogs, everything. She attempted suicide on multiple occasions back in 2022. I was the first person she rang when she was in the back of an ambulance on one of those occasions. But she went debt-free just over a year ago. And on the 20th of July last year, she married the guy that she'd stopped seeing. And she's pregnant again. She has her 9-year-old, 10-year-old daughter back with her now, one of the dogs. She's not working yet, but the transformation in her life is just phenomenal. Or a lady, interestingly, I've got an initial here, which isn't her initial now, but there's a story behind it. She's actually at Fowler Brennan this weekend, where the crowd have gone from Bridgenorth Baptist Church, but single mum to 4 children, and she was a victim of domestic violence from the dad of her eldest and the dad of her other 3. She was a New Age mysticist. Only 8 months ago she was practicing witchcraft, and she was the chief witch of Coney Woods Coven near Bridgenorth. When I first met her, she told me she hated me, and the last thing she wanted me to do was try and convert her. She was working all the hours that God gave, trying to support her young family. She was studying for a psychology degree so that she could counsel women like her from falling into the plight that she had. But she had a breakdown. Her mum died when she was 2 years old. Her dad, when she was only 9, was pimping her out to his mates and so on. And he's disowned her now that she's had the wherewithal to tell him what she thought about that. And she went debt-free last May, and she was baptised at Bridgenorth Baptist Church, full immersion baptism, just November, 2 months ago. So they, Melinda and many others, found hope and transformation through the compassion of a local church who saw their struggle and took action. Just three individuals in the crowd of millions today who are in urgent need of the compassion of Jesus to help fight their poverty situation. As Jesus followers, we are invited, in fact we're called, to be part of the solution today. Just as he called his disciples to be part of the solution on the shores of Galilee all those years ago. So going back to Matthew 14, we see that Jesus didn't feed the people all by himself, even though he could have done it alone. He's a miracle worker. He asked his disciples to sort it, to deliver the food for him. So as the passage says, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. And I can just imagine him. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. So after a day of Jesus healing the sick draws to a close, the disciples decide it's time to send the people away. I don't know, has anyone been watching The Chosen? Yeah. How far have you got?
I've seen it once now, we're going through it again now.
Going through it
and
again.
Actually, just on that bit where he did the bread and the fish.
Okay, well, there's also, I think it's season 2, episode 3, where he's doing a day of healing, and there are queues of people and so on. And the disciples are all just chatting amongst themselves. And he comes back from this absolutely drained, emotionally drained, blood on him, you know, sort of just beaten up or whatever. That's the situation that we've got here. The disciples look at the situation, the any long day, the thousands of hungry people, the solitary place they're in, and they conclude that the best thing to do is to send the crowd away so that they can buy food for themselves. In that moment, they didn't see themselves as part of the solution. Jesus, as ever, however, sees things rather differently. He sees that for those who follow him, to sit back and feed themselves is not an option. They are challenged to trust Jesus and to step out in compassionate action towards the crowd. Jesus invites them, politely, persuasively, to be a part of the solution. They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Jesus graciously challenges his disciples, empowering them to step up to the plate, to exercise faith, and to meet the immediate practical needs of the people before them. Disciples don't have much to give materially. They manage to muster only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But when they bring what little they have to the miracle-working Jesus, it becomes more than enough. Not only had his followers learned indirectly about Jesus' heart for all people, a heart that notices and that feels deep compassion, they were now being shown something extraordinary, that when they accepted Jesus' invitation to step out in faith and put his compassion into action, the miraculous happened. Now, Jesus' heart of compassion is central to the work of CAP. For 28 years now, CAP has been committed to noticing the individuals among the multitude of people crushed under the weight of debt and poverty. We've allowed ourselves to be moved with deep compassion, compelled to act in faith, to fight back and bring the transformative hope of Jesus in people's most challenging times. CAP wants to see transformed lives, thriving churches, and an end to UK poverty. A vision that can only be realised by stepping out in faith and putting Jesus' compassion into action. One way we do this is by partnering with local churches to provide face-to-face holistic debt help. A team from the church, and Richard is one of our befrienders and has seen one chap in Ludlow go debt-free. Debs, who is unfortunately suffering with cold today, got me a text this morning saying it wasn't because I was speaking that she was avoiding it. But Debs has worked with 3 ladies, one of whom is debt-free, 2 of whom live literally 200 yards from here, and both I hope will be debt-free within the next 4 weeks. So a team from the church visits people in their community who are trapped in unmanageable debt and compassionately walks beside them throughout their journey out of debt. This includes providing emotional support, helping them to gather and understand their debt paperwork, and responding to immediate practical needs such as delivering an emergency food shop or fuel voucher. Meanwhile, a team of debt advisors at our head office in Bradford negotiates with creditors on behalf of the client and draws up a budget enabling them to walk free from debt. Since 2010, CAP has seen more than 20,000 people become debt-free because of local, ordinary Christians putting Jesus' compassion into action. Indeed, on my watch in our centre in the past 2.5 years, I had our 30th client go debt-free on Thursday, 10 days ago. And that was a chap up in Church Stratton who has had 2 strokes and is living in supported living now, but is now debt-free. And the relief in his voice the day I spoke to him about it. Each client helped by CAP has a thriving local church walking alongside, actively serving them and bringing the hope of Jesus. as clients see the love of Jesus demonstrated through the compassionate action of their local church, many have themselves come to know him as their personal saviour. CAP also partners with local churches to provide a range of friendly, supportive community groups such as life skills courses to help people navigate life on low income, money coaching to budget and manage money better, and job clubs to gain the confidence and skills to find work. Each of these services, as well as the faithful partnership with local churches, is a crucial part of fulfilling the vision of transformed lives, thriving churches, and an end to UK poverty. CAP is committed to acting with compassion, as Jesus does, to see a hope-filled society free from poverty, with churches united to improve the lives of those facing debt and financial hardship. But let's return one final time to Matthew 14. The story finishes with the crowd fed and 12 basketfuls of broken pieces left over. Jesus brings abundance in this solitary place. The crowd was left amazed. John's account tells us that in this moment they realised Jesus was the prophet that they had been expecting. I believe that God is still working today to meet practical needs and bring the hope of Jesus to those who need it. And I believe he's still using his people to do that. Right now in the UK, poverty appears to be winning, but we can play our part in fighting back, and we can fight in the same way that Jesus did, with gut-wrenching compassion that causes us to act with abundant generosity. As we consider Jesus' compassion and how his disciples responded to his challenge to feed the crowd, may we too be moved with the same compassion for the multitude before us. May we accept Jesus' challenging invitation to act as his disciples did that day, trusting that when we respond in faith, Jesus has the power to work miracles. Now, one way that you can respond with compassionate action today is by giving a monthly donation to CAP head office. That's the primary way in which CAP is funded. There are more than 29,000 regular givers that we call life changers. So that's one option. Alternatively, you could choose to give to your local centre that I run. I can guarantee that every penny will be spent enabling us to support people struggling with unmanageable debt right in this area. If you want to visit me, I'll be having coffee and tea afterwards, and you can fill out appropriate forms, or chat to me if you want to volunteer to be a befriender, for instance, like Richard or Debs, or to run money coaching, or to help in some other way. We talked about prayer as well as another way that is really helpful. And I haven't got many left, and I have ordered more, but I've got a couple of free books if you want as well. Thank you once again for your support and for choosing to put Jesus' outrageous and generous compassion into action. If I may just close in prayer. Father, thank you for the example of your Son, Jesus. Thank you for his deep compassion on the crowd of people he met on the shores of Galilee, and how you invite us to put the same compassion into action today. We pray that we, your church, would respond in faith to your calling to meet the practical needs of those suffering in debt and poverty around us. We ask that we would be transformed by Jesus' love and example. As we are, may we act in faith to see precious individuals in our communities freed from poverty and transformed by the incredible, compassionate love of Jesus. Amen.